A British automaker created a vehicle in 1947 that it never meant for British citizens to drive. Before a single family in England had the opportunity to drive one of the thousands of brand new models that came off the Coventry assembly line, nearly all of them were placed directly onto a ship. This was not an error. It was deliberate. One car was going to be a part of the strategy to save Britain from going bankrupt after it had just won a war it could hardly afford. The Standard Vanguard was its name. Furthermore, its true story has very little to do with elegance, flair, or speed. It all has to do with a country that is broke, a firm that is willing to stake its whole future on doing it right, and a desperate export drive. Imagine Britain in the months following the conclusion of the war to comprehend why this car existed at all. The nation had triumphed, but the treasury had been devastated. Britain owed large debts to friends who had provided the country with food, fuel, and weapons after years of fighting depleted its gold reserves and damaged factories. Once occupying a fifth of the world, the empire could hardly buy bread for its own citizens. Exports were the only practical solution. In order to purchase raw supplies and settle its wartime obligations, Britain needed foreign currency, particularly American dollars. As a result, the government started what became known as the export drive, encouraging British businesses to focus on selling overseas before addressing home consumers. It was made very clear to automakers that their existence hinged on the number of cars that left the nation rather than the number that stayed. The crisis's numbers were astounding. Britain's American loan, expected to last 4 years, was practically drained within 2. Cutting imports to the bone was necessary. Bread, which had never been rationed even during the harshest years of the war itself, suddenly needed regulations. The United States Marshall Plan assistance kept the nation afloat, but it was never going to be a long-term fix. Cars were one of the few items the world still wanted to purchase from Britain, which had to earn its way back. Compared to nearly everyone else in the industry, Standard Motor Company took that directive quite seriously. Standard had produced simple, unremarkable family vehicles before to the war. However, its leadership made a choice in 1945 that would shape the business for the ensuing 20 years. Rather than update an old design, they would construct one wholly new automobile from scratch, engineered expressly to win over buyers who had never trusted a British car in their life. They christened it after HMS Vanguard, the Royal Navy's newest and most powerful battleship, launched only 3 years before. That name held significance in a nation where nearly every household had a husband, brother, or father who had served in the military. At a time when Britain sorely needed to feel strong once more, it suggested strength. Here is where the narrative gets intriguing, because the option that saved the Vanguard abroad is the same choice that would later damage it at home. Standard was also constructing tractors for Harry Ferguson at the time, and the Vanguard's engine and the Ferguson T20 tractor engine came from the very same family of design. The same wetliner block, the same overhead valve arrangement, tuned differently for 2 very different applications. A family saloon was powered by one version. The Little Gray Fergie, a tractor that helped mechanize farms all over the world, was powered by a somewhat detuned version. Because of this common ancestry, the Vanguard was designed to withstand abuse before impressing showroom guests. It became known for its tenacity in the world's most competitive markets. The Vanguard participated in the harsh redux around Australia trials, an endurance competition that ruined lesser automobiles in a matter of days. In Australia, where desert roads were frequently nothing more than dirt tracks spanning hundreds of merciless miles. Drivers who cared more about a car surviving 3,000 miles of red dust than how it looked sitting outside a dealership genuinely respected Vanguards once they repeatedly completed those trials. The Vanguard's reputation for tenacity carried over to the racecourse. Years later, motorsport icon Hoot Gibson continued to race Vanguards competitively in circuit races after campaigning one in the initial redux testing. A Vanguard piloted by Norman Beechey and John French placed second in its class at the first Armstrong 500 endurance race at Phillip Island, barely surpassed by the eventual class winner. That kind of performance on the track revealed everything about the car's true construction for a family saloon that was never intended for racing. However, British consumers back home were not evaluating vehicles based on how well they withstood the outback. Through the 1950s, European fashion tastes rapidly shifted toward sharper, lower, more contemporary designs, while Standard focused its technical efforts on durable, exportable simplicity. In comparison to more recent Ford and Austin competitors, The Vanguard's rounded, American-inspired design and its sloping rear, which critics dubbed the Beetleback, started to appear outdated. In its own domestic market, the very vehicle designed to save Britain's finances was silently losing the stylistic competition it never really participated in. None of these was nearly as important to the families who purchased one as the car's symbolic value. Even though rationing had ended for the majority of products, owning a new car was still considered a true luxury in Britain in the early 1950s, and waiting lists for new cars continued for months. A modest terraced house with a Vanguard parked outside was obvious evidence that the hardships of the war years were finally starting to ease. On peaceful Sunday mornings, fathers taught their kids how to drive. For their first official beach vacation, since before 1939, families filled them to capacity. The Vanguard became many consumers' first true exposure to British engineering in West Germany, where it momentarily outsold all other British automobiles put together. This vehicle was more than just a series of products for Standard. It was survival itself. During the most difficult years of the post-war economy, the money it made from overseas sales kept the Coventry plants operating and thousands of people employed. Through the 1950s, Standard was able to continue creating new models thanks to that financial breathing room, including the early sports cars that would eventually bring the Triumph name to a global audience. The post-war history of British automobiles may have turned out very differently if the Vanguard hadn't had such early international success. To remain relevant. The car continued to reinvent itself. In February 1954, Standard achieved something no other British manufacturer had attempted previously, becoming the first business to offer a factory-fitted diesel engine in a mainstream production automobile, adapted once again from the Ferguson tractor line. Even though its rivals disregarded diesel power as inappropriate for typical family automobiles, Standard was nevertheless eager to experiment with this cantankerous, clattering engine that required a meticulous hand-priming ritual on a chilly morning. The Vanguard's story does not conclude with victory, despite all that it accomplished. It finishes simply, almost without ceremony. By the early 1960s, the vehicle that had previously embodied Standard's whole character had become a remnant of a 1945-era design philosophy, increasingly surpassed by sleeker, more contemporary rivals. The company itself had been taken into Leland in 1961, and the new management was impatient with a model line that was based on priorities from a different era. The newly created Triumph 2000 took the place of the Vanguard, which was withdrawn in 1963. The Standard name itself, a badge that had been used on British roadways for more than 60 years, completely vanished from manufacture in a matter of years. There was no grand farewell. There was no headline commemorating the event. As Leland focused on emblems it deemed more commercially significant, the name discreetly disappeared from price lists and store windows. However, that peaceful conclusion seems almost unjust to anyone who truly comprehends what the Vanguard performed. This car was manufactured at the very moment that Britain needed something, anything, to sell to the globe, and it did it more successfully than almost anything else the nation created during those challenging years. At a time when the phrase "made in Britain" still had to mean anything to a consumer with alternative options, it transported the reputation of a battered nation onto roads in Germany, Australia, and dozens of other nations. Surviving Vanguards are now uncommon and are discreetly maintained by owners who know exactly what they are protecting in garages and vintage car clubs. An authentic piece of the machinery that helped rebuild a damaged nation, rather than just an old family tavern from a previous decade. It never had the flair of a sports car or the status of a premium nameplate. At a time when Britain truly could not afford for it to fail, it just did its job, mile after mile, on roads far from home. Consider sticking with this channel if you want more tales like this one. Real history presented truthfully and without hyperbole. There are still a lot of untold stories about British automotive history that need to be shared.